Today is all about the Gibson Les Paul. I'm going to break down its features, its specs, and give you guys all the know on this legendary instrument. Let's dive in. So for a while, we've been talking about Strats, and Strats are cool. I've got a ton of videos on Strats, link in the description below. But of course, there are more than one guitar style out there, and today we're tackling the equally legendary Gibson Les Paul. The Les Paul is definitely older than the Stratocaster, and in fact, the Les Paul began production in 1952, which is a couple years before the Strat did. We're going to go over the pros and cons of the Les Paul and show you guys deep down what makes this instrument so great. Now, where to get its name? The Les Paul is named after the guitarist that played them. Les Paul was an inventor and musician in the 50s. He's an incredible guitar player and inventor. He invented modern double tracking. He is an incredible guitar player as well, with a lot of jazz influences and Django Reinhardt influences. If you love jazz guitar and the early days of guitar playing, go check out Les Paul and Mary Ford. You're not going to want to miss them. They are music history, and you definitely need to know who they are. So the main features of a Les Paul guitar are going to be its pickups, its features, as well as the materials that you build it with. We're going to go over them one by one. So first off, the headstock of Gibson guitars, they're pretty iconic. I've got one right here in my Les Paul studio. And many a lawsuit has been filed over companies trying to replicate this iconic headstock. The light curve on top is very much reminiscent, as well as that tapering along the sides here. You can definitely see that squaring on the sides. The headstock is also the most notorious of any Gibson style guitar. The headstock is prone to breaking. There's a neck joint that's right here on the side, and the necks always break on Gibson guitars. You can kind of see it bow a little bit from the side here. And the way these tuner pegs are kind of sitting on this headstock doesn't allow it to tune very well. You'll find that a lot of Les Pauls have major stability issues when it comes to tuning, particularly the D and G string, the ones that are on the inside of the tuning pegs here. So the Gibson Les Paul is always going to be a single cutaway, with the body being made of solid mahogany with generally a carved maple top. This allows the mahogany to develop a rich and warm tone, and the carved maple top is going to actually spice up the high end and mid range of those notes so that there is some bite to it and you can make them sound really, really crisp. So the necks are almost always made of mahogany with a rosewood fretboard or an ebony fretboard. You're going to find that the necks are also set in place. They're not screwed on like a Stratocaster. A set neck means that the neck has been fitted into a joint and then glued on. So there's no changing out necks with the Les Paul. If you break it, it's a tough time to get it back together again. So the most iconic part of a Les Paul is probably going to be its pickups. Now when the Gibson Les Paul was first introduced to the market, it came with P90s. And after a while, about 1957, they started using the patent applied for, or PAF, humbucking pickups. Now the humbucking pickups, the patent applied for, began in 57. They've gone through some iterations over the years. They stopped and they came back. It's all kind of jarbled, but essentially the PAFs are the tone to get when it comes to a Les Paul pickup. Typically, in the early days, it was made of Alnico 2 magnets, and nowadays they're made with Alnico 5. And Alnico 5 has been the standard since the 60s. You can still buy a guitar in the 50s format, however, with Alnico 2. And Alnico is just an acronym. It means aluminum, nickel, and cobalt. It's what makes up the magnets inside of the pickup. So when you hear Alnico, you know that it's made of those three elements. PAFs are still in production today, but they're not necessarily the same PAFs they were in the 50s. We've gone through some modern iterations, but the classic vintage PAF tone is sought after by many guitarists, and that vintage market for vintage PAFs is still really, really strong today. So when it comes to buying a Les Paul, Les Pauls can be tricky to buy. That's because over the years, Gibson has had some pretty up and down quality control over their guitars through the course of time. Now, if you want to go with a solid Les Paul, nothing's going to beat you going into a store and trying one out for yourself. It's a sad thing, but a lot of Les Pauls play different than others, and so you can't just go buy a Les Paul on the internet and expect it to play the way you want it to. I highly recommend going into your local music store, going to Guitar Center, and just trying out some Les Pauls that you like. It's always a toss-up when going to a Guitar Center. So go to your local music shop, they take care of their instruments, go try out a Les Paul. Now, Les Pauls are very, very expensive. Something that Gibson is known for is having very, very expensive instruments, close to the $3,000 range. Thankfully, nowadays, you can buy a pretty much like standard Les Paul flagship model for about $2,600. Those are going to be the classic 50s and the classic 60s. If you like the sound of Alnico 2, that warmer tone, and the larger neck of the classic 50s, you're going to love that P90 and that classic 50s Les Paul. If you like the sound of Alnico 5 magnets and that thinner neck, you're going to love the classic 60s. And so for me, when buying a Les Paul, I typically went for a Les Paul Studio, and that's the one I have right here. The Les Paul Studio has all the trims and fixins of a standard Les Paul, but without all of the quilted maple and the really expensive cosmetic features that typically make a guitar like that very expensive. And so I'd recommend getting a Les Paul Studio to start if you like the sound of your Les Paul. And then if you like the sound of a Les Paul but don't want to spend as much as a Studio, you can go with the Epiphone Les Pauls, the Les Paul Juniors. They're all going to have a pretty much standard Les Paul tone to them. But in my mind, nothing beats a Les Paul Studio. And like other Les Pauls, their years can be pretty haphazard, but I recommend that any Les Paul Studio from the 90s is going to be a solid pick. They had a really great production year in the 90s through 97 or so. Well, guys, I hope you've enjoyed this episode of IkeGuitar. Be sure to like, be sure to comment, be sure to subscribe. You should totally go check out a Les Paul at a store near you. These guitars are iconic, and they're really, really great sounding. You should totally try one out. I'll be playing some in some videos down the road here, so don't miss those videos. And of course, please hit me up on Instagram at IkeGuitar. I want to know what you guys are playing. If you've got a Les Paul that you love from a certain year that you like, let us know in the comments. The bros on the channel and the girls on the channel need to know what kind of Les Paul years were great. So let me know in the comments below what years to look for in a Les Paul. And of course, be sure to come back next time. Enjoy your day, go grab a Les Paul, and start playing. We'll see you guys around.